welcome to a new edition of the podcast. So, like every week, we're almost immediately going to go to the dialogue this week with Russel Cobb, who's going to talk to us about his motivation for photography. Well, the reasons of photography. But just to remind you that there's a French version of the podcast for those who speak French. And this week it's Vincent Calmel who will talk to us about his relationship to movies, how it got him into photography and back, and his current search for a film editor for his latest movie. But anyways, so now it's going to be the dialogue. And after, if you want to forward at something like 14 minutes, I would recommend to listen to the dialogue, of course. But after, you will have a small second part where I'll talk about the project podcast, where we look at inspiration, a project made specifically for the podcast, how we go into storytelling, find ideas, and where it's currently going in this third week. And also a little bit about Arles Festival, the Rencontre d'Arles Festival, one of the largest festivals for photography in the world, that starts next week, and also a small feedback about the Foam Talent Call and where we're at. So catch you after the dialogue. Very happy to have Russel Cobb as my invitee for this dialogue. I like old cars and revivals, and there's a Goodwood Festival, and I discovered your work in that context. But your work goes way beyond. And I wanted to ask you, I'm going to start directly with the main question. Why did you choose photography, or why did photography choose you?
I think from the beginning, photography was always about creating memories and also creating stories. And as a sort of fine art illustrator, I've always had this sort of imagination. So, and what the camera has given me, which more so than the brush and the pen, is an immediacy to sort of tell a story.
I'll put obviously all the links below the description of the podcast.
Sure.
You tell stories you tell where you have portraits trying to convey a situation, a part of a story. You've studied illustration and photography. How would you describe the way you put those two together?
I think it was right from the beginning. I remember sort of being a very impressionable student, and I sat in a lecture and I was showing the work of, now my pronunciation is horrible, the French photographer Auger. And it was that basic sort of framework that the physical world is a stage set, and man and women and the people are the drama. And it's always the marriage of the two.
Yeah, because you talk, I think it's on your website, you talk about some kind of going back to some kind of nostalgia or romanticism, going back to some historical facts in older times.
It's an obsession. I mean, I've always had an obsessive interest in history. And I think when I first started, I realized that there's this big British subculture of dressing up in various guises. Reenactment is one that is a really big pastime. But as a photographer, let's say when I started 12, 13 years ago, when you first go to these events, you just see, wow, there's a uniform. And it took me quite a while to kind of find my feet with this project. I just keep taking pictures and taking pictures. And then it started to become about sort of these incredible eccentric people, really, just British eccentricity, these people that transform themselves into this alternate person. They become this person for an event. They time travel back in time. They often time travel to different eras. So it was all about this sort of idea there's an actor in everyone. And that's what that's a sort of the bigger framework. And an escapism as well. You're always trying to use your imagination. And I have to say, just with put my photography hat on from the early days, you know, there was a lot of obsession when you're learning your craft and learning kit and learning lighting and the transition into digital and the obsession with megapixels. So this kind of polluted my thinking for quite a while, coming to grasp with all this. But after a while, it was, what's this really about? And every picture has a story.
It's funny because you talk about time traveling, and actually I was looking at your work, and I felt more that you were as a time traveler bringing back memories from the past.
Just on the bigger question again, I think as a very young lad, I was at art school and we were obsessed with Don McCullum and all the war photographers. And so this is the way I got to, where do I start? So with the war reenactors, I realized I was never going to be a Don McCullum. You understand the makeup, let's say I always joke I'm a sensitive flower. You have a sensitivity and, it can be quite hardcore. So getting into reenactments and finding yourself in battle scenes was this sort of playing out this imaginative role. And it's incredible, and I have had moments when you have to be kitted up. It's this immersive experience. So I've been in German kit, British kit. They have private battles. I've been in battle. And you are there, there's this escapism. You catch yourself and you think, hang on a minute, this really could be 50 years ago, 60, 70. Yeah, it's like a mutual collaboration between people. I'm there. You have to be in kit as well because they're obsessive. And, for a public event, you'll ruin their eyeline. They'll ruin the displays. And it took many years of going back again and again, meeting the same people and building up trust. So it took me a long time to sort of find my way. We can talk about revival as well. That's kind of like the biggest, Goodwood Revival is one of the biggest motoring events in the world. I sent my pictures of myself in RAF Battle of Britain kit on the airfield to the Duke of Richmond. It's very hard to get in contact with this huge organization. And he absolutely loved it. And he just said, can you work on a project for us to capture the essence of revival? And revival is really a massive dressing up event for the general public. So everyone transports themselves back in time, and it's vintage motoring and dressing up, and it's just like a big party for a lot of people.
Talking about this work you're doing for the revival, it started in 2017 and it's still not finished.
2016. It's just an ongoing project, and I'm actually having an exhibition at the event of some of the best dressed, and I think I'm in the magazine. And I just work on long-term projects. I started working for the Telegraph newspaper in a very fast way. I mean, it's just a completely different world. It's literally wire the picture off that day and off it goes.
With what you're at right now, how do you think it changed parts of your life? Did it have a very impactful effect?
I think absolutely. I think I've always been a sort of artist illustrator and a photographer, but I won lots of awards in illustration and Best of British Awards, and I was chairman of the UK Association, and I ticked all the badges. But essentially, the life of an illustrator is sitting on your own at a desk. And I don't get depressed, but I was sort of trying to find reasons not to do the work, and it would get me a bit down. But photography is much more, I joke with friends, it's kind of has a bit more rock and roll, and in the sense that you're mixing with people, it's immediate, it's a mutual performance sometimes and when I'm taking photos, I very rarely do I plan, because particularly at Goodwood Revival, there's never have a plan because there's always the unexpected. And if you have a plan, it all goes out the window. Mm-hmm. So I've learned over the years, I'm highly trained to work on the moment, just find the location. I could be a steam train. Last year was a crashed UFO, and I stand there with I have spotters and myself, and we just grab someone, and then we turn that into effectively a studio shoot on the side of the street. And you really have to be tunnel vision. I try and make these shoots look like it's a very intimate kind of one-to-one shoot, but quite often I'm laying on the ground with people stepping over me and beer falling on me, but I just go into this tunnel. And sometimes you'll just arrive and there's a Spitfire there. There'll be and a Messerschmitt, and you don't expect it. But it's wonderful, because if you had to arrange to get a Spitfire and a Messerschmitt on the field, that's the curse of photography I'm finding, is finding your models and getting your location, the access, this and that. So I've just become highly skilled at, in moments, I can see it. Then you weave in the story. I'll try and create some sort of emotion. You're lost, you're you're waiting for your RAF husband to return. And so people are very good at the moment. There's a perception a lot of these shots are kind of really taking a lot of time, but they're not. They're, you know, I've got a photo shoot on a boat on Sunday, and sometimes I'll loosely storyboard it for myself in my head. I'll get into my DNA and my brain what I'm going to do, but I'll probably create the story on the day.
Photography compared to illustration, if I understand well, brought you the adventure, the excitation of meeting the characters that you used to draw in some way.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. It's a two-way thing, because my artwork is very colorful and completely different in some ways. And if I had the resources and the time, I'd love to work that way. But sometimes when I'm in the studio, I love location photography because it's the unexpected. In the studio, it's a different thing completely. I enjoy it, but it's if you've just got a white background, it much becomes, you know, a plain background. It's a different ball game.
How do you see your photographic career right now? I've seen your work, your art online, but I think you've had exhibitions where you had large prints where the physicality is way more important. Yes. How do you see your work in the future? You tend to prefer the real thing, or?
I think it's really important I think we're in a world, it's so difficult to sort of find a voice and find a language. And I just think I need to just stick to my guns. And obviously, as photographers, we want to make a living, and stepping into vintage worlds, you know, like a vintage drinks and vintage clothing. So I'm just sort of right on the cusp of trying to be able to sustain what I'm doing, to kind of bring that into more of a commercial context. But I was at Photo London very recently, and what came out of that was I think photography in the UK has finally been embraced as an art form in itself. But I just walked away just thinking, just stick to your guns, you know, just stick to your own voice. And as soon as you're trying to be something you're not, Instagram is the compare and despair world. You know, there's so much fantastic work out there. So it's a case of just sort of being very blinkered. I just keep trying to create more stories at the moment, more of a narrative and storytelling.
Are you working on some books, or are you planning to have some publications?
I'll be really honest with you. I'm just one of these classic creative people that love creating. And then there's always a book in the pipeline. You know, I just that time to sit down and work with I've worked with a designer. I nearly had a book with a designer, and the designer just kind of, it didn't happen. Goodwood Revival, that's the goal. We are working towards a book. But when that happens, you don't know yet. But I'm always looking to sort of, I love collaborating, but it's very time consuming to do these things.
Do you have something else going on, or that you've discovered recently?
I just think everything's just spinning off Revival at the moment. And through Revival, I'm meeting lots of reenactors. So personal projects is what I've always been done. I mean, I've always done very well. I mean, so I just tend to be honest. I was photographing a couple last weekend on the steam railway, and we're continuing the story this weekend. We're on a boat, and I'll just kind of create some sort of story there. So it's becoming a bit more bespoke sort of stories, and where that goes and where that, I'm not too sure yet, but I'm just sort of sticking to my path. But I think this whole sort of reenactment world and there's lots of little subplots and lots of little stories. So it's a very good question, and I need to sort of invest time in finding ways to get the work out there as well. That's the most important thing. I think here in the UK, I think my work sits in this very funny place at the moment, because when I enter competitions like the Taylor Wrestling or the AOP Awards, the work seems to have this sort of, I sit between fine art and commercial. And I think sometimes if you enter a fine art award, it looks a little bit too tainted with commercial. And then when you enter on the commercial side, it's a little bit too fine arty. And that's something I don't need to address that, but that's where I sit. Where it goes, who knows?
Yeah, but that makes also for the richness, I think, of your world and your work.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, well, thanks again for this small dialogue.
You're more than welcome.
And looking forward to see the future of the work you're on.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
so second part of the podcast. First, we're going to talk about the project podcast, which I named Matter because of the many synonyms and the meaning of that word, which is quite wide-ranging. And this project, again, it's an experiment in kind of real time. It's about inspiration, how you write a story, how you find ideas, how you try to build something concrete. And the experiment is actually me putting myself in this position of semi-danger, because I will have to tell you something every week and see where it goes, and see how my process works, and hopefully get some feedback from you too. But last week I had basically the idea of going towards some kind of magazine, some kind of publication, and had for the first page a photo, this blurry photo of a sunset, which I felt went well into the idea of inspiration. How do you create matter for expressing thoughts, feelings, and that back page where I sort of tried to reflect on my past and the lack of inspiration. And I had this photo from a few decades ago of my studio and a camera, the camera my grandfather had given me. So this week I was kind of stuck. I think at the beginning of a project like this, it's kind of normal, and even more so when I kind of improvised the idea for the podcast. So I wasn't really prepared. So I think that's quite interesting per se. So I tried to go forwards with something that would make sense. And so I sort of kind of reworked the back page and, some futile things, like I just changed the color from black to white. Still have the synonyms of the term matter on the last page, the cover page, the back cover page. And I started, because I had no real more inspiration, I was like, oh, okay, what am I going to fill this magazine with? So I tried something. I tried doing, I like, for those who know my work, I kind of work in portrait mode, in portrait format more than panoramic format. So, and I like diptychs. So I tried to do a diptych, see where it brought me, and chose two recent pictures I had done. One was a butterfly into the grass that's flying, actually, and another one of wind into curtains on a small building in a suburb in some medium-sized city. Both facing each other for those page 2 and 3. I thought it represented something about the emptiness, the stillness of the moment, and what does it really mean? Is there a meaning to those things that suddenly we freeze in time? Anyways, that's a try. I'm not sure it works. And for the first page of the magazine, of course, besides the cover, I decided to do a crop on the back page and focus on this camera I had on the photo for the back cover page. Not sure that works. Again, we'll see in the weeks to come. Maybe everything will change. Also, something I'm talking about on the French version of the podcast, I'm doing this project. The physical project for now is only in English. So I talk about that in the French podcast because I think depending on the language you use, it's pretty important. Your thought process is not the same at all. And I got stuck with that in the French podcast. Using synonyms of the term matter is definitely not the same in French. So I stuck for the French podcast to this same English-speaking project for now. Maybe it will change. Maybe I will do a branch. Maybe I will go to French, and we'll talk only about the French version on this English podcast. Anyways, also I tried to stimulate my inspiration, so I decided to do a page where I sort of write small haikus about inspiration. I'm not sure that worked, but that's where I'm at with the project this week. We'll see where it will evolve, but anyways, yeah. Also, for the second part of the podcast, I just wanted to talk about the photo festival Rencontre de Arles in France. It's one of the largest festivals in the world. Many of you probably already know it. You can find the website online. It's in French and English, so you'll find all the information about the festival. It goes from the 3rd of July to the 24th of September. The first week is the Pro Week. So you have loads of people. So it's super dynamic, lots of events. Of course, the exhibitions, but you'll cross almost anyone you want during that first week. It's a really a great mix to network and enjoy. So even if you're not a pro, it's a really enjoyable time. But it's really overcrowded. That's the bad part of it. So if you like viewing exhibitions in a more quiet and comfortable way, that's probably not a good time, but it's a great time otherwise. So I'll be there for a while next week. So probably we'll talk about it in the weeks to come. For this year, the subject, well, the thematic is officially translated to a state of consciousness. So they're going to elaborate around this thematic. And the poster photo was taken by Emma Sarpaniemi. Maybe I'll have some more next week on her, also and her work. But yeah, so that's about it. I just wanted to inform you about this major festival in photography. And also last update about the foam talent call. Still trying to have someone, one of the kind people of foam, to explain, or maybe to go more into their understanding of why they communicate on a global talent search, but at the same time they want to focus on a certain demographic, which is from 18 to 40 years old. And why would it make sense when you look for a new photographical talent to restrict the demographics? I do understand beyond 18 for probably legal reasons, or simply mature, the maturity state of mind of the authors, and that's still discussable. But hopefully I'll get someone on the podcast. But yeah, that's it for the second part for this podcast this week, and catch you next week.